Welcome to this special episode of the BeamG podcast. Special because today we are talking not about structuring and outlining stories and fiction, but about how to structure non-fiction, making facts memorable, and specifically the two types of non-fiction book. Now, here at BeamG, we know a lot about how stories work. We consider ourselves experts on dramaturgy and narrative. Fiction is our forte. But we don't really claim to understand non-fiction anywhere near as well. And that's why we were very keen to attend a session on non-fiction at the author conference at this year's Leipzig Book Fair. The session was by Yvonne Kraus. Now, we don't really know Yvonne except from what she did at the session, and that was great. So we can't really endorse her, but we will give here a brief summary of what she taught us. So it's only partially originally content. A lot is from Yvonne, so thanks for that. And here's the brief summary of how non-fiction works. Specifically the two basic structures of non-fiction books. The first form or structure is the reference or articles form. Now, imagine circles arranged in a circle, with maybe lines going from the individual circles into the center of the arrangement. Each individual circle stands for a unit of content, a chapter. This representation tries to express a way of reading a book. The reader can dip into any chapter at will. They function independently of each other. It's not necessary to read them in sequence or read all of them. Cookbooks are a good example. Each recipe constitutes a chapter, a unit, and can be consulted without knowing the other units. Now, we can of course talk about content that is more complex than recipes, for example, political articles. The units may contain information that is repetitious in the book as a whole, if this information is necessary in order to understand the content of a specific individual chapter. That is, it may well be the case that the same basic facts are stated in several of the chapters, if they are required to know, because the author cannot assume that the reader will have read previous chapters in the book already. The chapters don't build on each other. Certain units of information may be referenced. For example, a lasagna recipe may call for bechamel sauce, the making of which may not be described in the lasagna recipe, but instead the lasagna recipe might simply say, "See the recipe for bechamel sauce on page 27 in the section Basic Sauces." The main body of the book may be subdivided into meaningful sections. The promise the book makes to the reader is that the reader will find specific information on a particular subtopic easily, without having to read the entire book. Furthermore, there may well be at least two units or chapters that stand apart from this big arrangements, or that come around or before and after the main bulk of the book. An introductory section, or prologue, which explains, among other things, how to read the book, and a closing outro or epilogue, which may contain a summary or conclusion. The other form, the basic structure of non-fiction, is the step-by-step, from beginning to end form. Now, imagine circles arranged in a straight line, many circles in a row. Again, each circle represents a unit of content and meaning, or a chapter. In this case, the author assumes the reader will read the book from beginning to end. So information will be structured in such a way as to be received by the reader, starting on the first page and continuing all the way through to the final page. The process described will be more long-term in comparison to the reference structure. So compare instructions for building a complicated machine, for example, or a big Lego set, to recipes in a cookbook. In a step-by-step guide or an in-depth study, the reader is being informed on the topic concerned from A to Z. It may be necessary to know the contents of Chapter 1 in order to fully understand Chapter 2, and so on. It can be more difficult for the author to judge how much information she needs to supply to the readers at any given point. That said, there will always be a degree of assumed knowledge in the readership or target group of the book. While the knowledge of the readers grows from chapter to chapter, repetitions are a service from the author to the reader, because one can't really expect the reader to remember every single detail transmitted in previous pages. The promise of such a beginning-to-end book is essentially a transformation. Having read this book, you will be more knowledgeable about its topic than beforehand. You will understand something you previously were unaware of or not as aware of. This means that the book has an argument, a case, an agenda. It wants to achieve something, a change in its readers. And in order to do this, it will arrange the argumentation in a convincing way, providing more and more backing for its case. Such a step-by-step non-fiction book may also have an introduction and a conclusion, a foreword and an afterword, and the last epilogue section will point out how far the reader has come since the prologue, because the book has taken its readers on a journey of revelation, which is actually what fiction does too. Now, what both non-fiction approaches have in common. In both types of non-fiction book, the contents page or pages should be as clear as possible. Before buying a non-fiction book, most people will glance at the contents page to reassure themselves that this book actually contains what they want and expect it to, what the title and the cover and the blurb promise. Put the contents page at the front, because certain internet bookshops or platforms offer a look inside the book, which usually contains the first few pages and not necessarily the last. If you divide your book into sections, each section title should be named so that its content is readily apparent. If there are subsections to the sections, try to keep the system of organization clear and the levels distinct. Usually, more than 2 levels of subsection is not a good idea. And as a rule of thumb, the number of chapters within a section or subsection should be maybe between 5 and 9. A foreword explains the why of the book, the reason you wrote it, the story behind why you felt compelled or were chosen to write the text that follows, and what makes you qualified. Many readers skip the foreword, so don't place essential information here. An introduction elucidates the structure of the book, whether it is to dip into or to read from start to finish, as well as other specifics of arrangement or layout that the book may contain. The introduction defines the important recurring terms to make sure that the readers are really on the same page as you, the author. The introduction explains in what topic or field the book can help and how the book works, and in what way it seeks to achieve its aim. The introduction provides expectation management, if you will. It supplies the promise and may tease at the transformation that is to come. In almost all non-fiction, clarity wins over beauty. Keep the text as simple as you can in order to ensure that readers will understand what you are trying to say. Unlike fiction, which often tries to lead the readers astray or mystify or obfuscate what is actually going on until a moment of revelation, non-fiction tries to make readers understand at every stage. That the readers receive and process and gain awareness through the information your book provides is probably more important than the beauty of the prose. Having said that, clear language is of course beautiful, and carefully worded prose is of course easier and more fun to read than shoddily written text. The title of your book should preferably be memorable and enticing and catchy. It points to what the book is about, obviously, but may do so indirectly when it is accompanied by a pithy subline that makes the meaning of the title absolutely clear. I'm not going to give any examples here, just have a look in the non-fiction section of your local bookshop. So, an invitation. Consider your non-fiction book as an invitation. There are certain things that an invited person expects and maybe ought to receive. So for a non-fiction book, this is the order. The topic or theme, like what is this book really about? Maybe it's subject, it's genre. For whom is this book relevant? Who's the target group? Who is this book addressing? The elevator pitch. What is this book about? Explained in just a few seconds or a couple of sentences at most. Then, as we said, the foreword, the introduction, the bulk of the book, the main text, the chapters organized in one of the two ways outlined earlier, the outro or maybe summary, and finally, a brief part, the delivery of the promise, and more, the icing on the cake, the outlook into the future, a kind of a pointing to what to do with this newly recognized transformation, what comes next after this revelation. And then there's the STETS rule. Whether reference dipping in or argumentative step-by-step non-fiction, each chapter, possibly including parts such as the foreword or the epilogue, may be constructed in the following pattern. S for story. Begin each chapter with an anecdote, because people relate to stories more than to simple facts or factual reports. T for theory. Explain your point with the theory and the facts. E for example. Back up your point, make the theory clear with examples. T is for task. Activate the readers, ask questions, perhaps even give them something to do which will help them understand the theory and experience an example themselves rather than just read about it. And S for summary. Repeat in a few words what the reader has learned in this chapter. Okay, so now we know how non-fiction works. We feel inspired to try it out ourselves. We may just write a non-fiction book. Here at BeamG, its topic or theme would be dramaturgy and how to structure fiction and stories. It would be relevant for authors and storytellers, for stage, page or screen. The elevator pitch? Well, let's try it. The BeamG Handbook on the Craft of Developing Stories focuses on the emotional responses of the audience and explains in depth and detail each aspect of dramaturgy, helping authors and storytellers to outline compelling plots and develop engaging characters. Maybe we can do better. But the book would have a foreword and an introduction. But how would we organize the bulk of the book? Well, how would you want to read it? Dip into separate articles, or would you prefer to read from start to finish? Personally, I'm tending to the beginning to end approach, since we would hope to transform you into a better author, no? Anyway, thanks for listening to this special on non-fiction and how to make facts more memorable. Hope you enjoyed.